Welcome to the Embodiment podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with specialists from around the world. I'm your host for today, Mark Walsh. So this podcast is one of those talky ones with just me, and we're looking at meditation today, particularly embodiment and meditation. What's the relationship? Is there such a thing as disembodied meditation? What other schools are out there? We're going to kind of cover the area. And I think it's first of all, just to say my kind of qualifications for this. I am a fairly long-term meditator, but I'm not a meditation teacher. I teach some basic meditation. I'm fairly familiar with the field. Obviously, we interview meditation teachers. I've been sitting regularly for about a dozen years, and I think well over 20 was the first time I kind of ever meditated. I'm usually doing one or two retreats a year of some kind. I think the longest retreat I ever did was 25 days in a monastery. I've done a solitary retreat that was pretty full on. And generally I'm doing a sort of normal 7-day, 10-day, 2-week, Vipassana style type retreats. So that's a little bit about where I'm coming from. My own background is mostly Theravadan, but with bits and bobs of Zen and a little bit of exposure to Tibetan stuff. So it's fairly wide ranging. So I feel like I could give you an overview of this topic, but I'm certainly not an expert. And I point you to podcasts we've done with people like Martin Aylward or Miles Kessler, people that are really, full-time hardcore professionals in this field. All right. The first thing to say is, for me, meditation is always a practice that I do, no matter what. It's really become... Other things come and go. My keto goes up and down. Yoga's pretty consistent, but meditation is the one thing I'm doing every day, or if not every day, maybe 13 days out of 14, something like that. It's pretty rare for me to miss a day, and that's simply because I find it so beneficial. Obviously with the mindfulness boom, which has happened in the time that I've been teaching embodiment, quite very pleasing in some ways, and then some worrying aspects and sort of slightly comical aspects now. It's interesting to see this boom happen. When I first started meditating, nearly every teacher you went to had at least sort of 20, 30 years experience, maybe 100 retreats under their belt, something like that. These days, I meet people who've done weekend workshops. I got a message just the other day from someone in Russia who had a little bit of contact with her. She'd been to a WebP workshop, and she was saying, hey, I'm thinking about becoming a mindfulness teacher because it seems like the quick route compared to becoming a coach or a yoga teacher or a therapist, quick route to sort of a helping profession. And I was like, wow, I couldn't have imagined that even being an opinion a couple of years ago even. It's partly particular to Russia, but the other thing, people have become aware of mindfulness being involved in everything from snipers to pickup artists to politicians. People might have some concerns there. So I can certainly see cases for that. So it's interesting times to be in. Okay, so back to the topic. So for me, my personal practice of meditation also is the foundation for my embodied practice, for being an embodied coach, embodied facilitator, embodied leader, both for myself. And this is something I'm certainly recommending to students. So, for example, on the embodied facilitator course, which is 9 months, people actually agree to meditate on a daily basis throughout the entire course. I think starting from sort of week 3 or something when we teach them. So it's really, big part of that. And the reason we found that is it really helps. Whatever your embodied practice, mindfulness is a great foundation. Awareness, embodiment is by definition awareness based. So the subjective experience of the body is one definition of somatics or embodiment. An awareness-based movement practice would be another definition I've heard. So awareness is really key, and so we can think of meditation as training that muscle of awareness. That's one way to think about it. If you ask people what is meditation, you're going to get many responses, and it's kind of a bucket category. Some people say it's all mind training, awareness training. The terms can be very interchangeable, and different terms from different languages like Pali or Tibetan or Japanese can be used as well on top of that. So it's all a bit confusing. So I'm going to basically say here what it is for me, my own personal point of view on this. Okay, so why might it be a foundation for embodied practice? Well, if we think of embodiment as a number of skill sets, If you've heard me talk about embodied intelligence, this is one way it can be presented. I very much like this presentation because it's not esoteric, it's practical. People can get their head around it and they can start learning these skills, without needing huge depth of philosophical understanding or submitting to a guru system or whatever. So one would be this body awareness is the basis of all the other skills. So if we're going to self-regulate, that might be another skill set. Express, if we're going to be empathic and listen to others, or be impactful and influential. 4 main areas I talk about based on Daniel Goleman's model, copied by other people since, I believe, this model. But I came up with it myself, taking Daniel Goleman's model over to Embodiment about 10 years ago. I started doing that. It's really built on this foundation of embodied awareness. So meditation is returning to the body. Specifically, it may be body sensations, and one can get more accurate within that. So Shinzen Young talks about sensory clarity. Sensory clarity. So the idea we can just start to feel much more. For me, for example, now having practiced quite a lot of body-based meditation, and I'll say different forms in a minute, but it's very clear to me that, my different toes, for example, or inner structures, it just becomes a lot more clear. And what I can feel becomes much more refined, in the same way as a wine taster who'd spent a lot of time tasting wine would be able to tell you, this one's a little chocolatey or bootlacy or whatever. Now, while there may be a certain pretension to that, it's clear that they're really talking about something. Wine tasters will agree to some extent, at least. So there's a certain validity to the distinctions they're finding. The same with embodiment teachers. There's a certain validity to the finer and finer distinctions that one is becoming aware of. You're not just making it up, you are actually feeling more, and there's consequences to this. For example, it could be greater intuition, greater emotional intelligence, and it's the basis of our kind of somatic radar when we say coaching or leading or parenting or whatever we're doing, that basic body awareness. So refinement in terms of the sensitivity to what you're feeling. And I'd also just say our sort of base level of body awareness. So for me, what I notice, the more I'm meditating, and the more I meditate both over a long time frame and a short time frame, this is quite interesting. There's 2 sort of time frames to consider. On the one hand, a long-term meditation practice builds mindfulness, but builds basic body awareness, but also just, having meditated 10 minutes ago or an hour ago or whatever is going to also do that. So it's a combination of that long and short-term time frame. This applies to so many embodiment skills, actually. It's well worth thinking about 2 time frames in all of these skill sets, actually. Anyway, so building a greater, if we want, quantity of body awareness and just a greater time of the day, I'm aware of my body. So it's really, as soon as I wake up in the morning these days, I'm quite aware of my body. And I know this. So, for example, if I'm working on my posture, I might notice even the position of my feet when I'm going to the toilet within about a minute of waking up. I didn't used to be able to do that. It used to take me a while. I used to have to consciously sort of tune into myself somehow. The sustained body awareness. Also, it takes less attention because it's more sustained. So, for example, I can have a conversation and focus on my body without closing my eyes, without looking weird, and still, listening to the other person, because it only takes a certain degree of that active concentration, if you will, in the it's fairly habitual to be aware of the body, and this can definitely be built up with body-based awareness. And another set of skills, as it were, Shinzen Young might talk about, is equanimity. So being non-reactive, not pushing or pulling in relation to the sensations of the body. I say, with increased meditation, often we can have more pleasure in the body as well, as we come into a sense of ease, expansiveness, relaxation, awareness itself, bringing those things. Any techniques we might then apply, but awareness itself is often bringing relaxation. If you touch someone's body that's tense, they suddenly feel that part of the body and might sigh or relax that part of the body. They might even start crying as there's a release with the relaxation. So I hope this is fairly apparent. My experience for me of meditating long term is increased spaciousness, pleasure, ease, and eventually, and it's fairly new for me, but I understand it's a fairly common experience for many long-term meditators, a feeling of kind of bubbly, like warm champagne, effervescence, a feeling of, it might be described as ki or chi or energy. You have to be a bit careful, I'd say, not to give an objective formulation to a subjective experience in that way, but it's clear that there's a flowing or it's a sort of impermanence that's experienced in the body more sustainably. I'm also told people often will experience dukkha or suffering in the body sustainably. There's a sort of ongoing discomfort, and that's certainly a stage embodiment people can go through, never quite being comfortable and clicking and popping and always wriggling and moving. There's definitely stages where I've had in life where I've done more of that. So it's not all about the bliss, but this seems to be a leaning towards the pleasant, I would say, except for some of these difficult periods that people go to. And of course, the other main skill to keep using Shinzen Young, who we've interviewed twice actually, his model there would be actually to be able to concentrate, to be able to remain one's attention on the body, both deliberately and in the face of other stimuli that might distract one from the body. Why is this important? Well, for many of the skills, we need the awareness. So, for example, I'm having that concentration on my body, knowing that I'm getting into a certain emotional state when I'm in a conversation and being like, okay, do I want to go there? Do I want to regulate that? Do I want to walk away from this conversation? Or just noticing the information I'm given from that, which is useful. Okay, so what would be an embodied approach to meditation? Well, let's come back to definition of embodiment. I think that's podcast number 1, still a popular one. What is embodiment? I've done a couple of YouTube videos on that as the hashtag keeps getting more and more used, and I think people are more and more loosely using it. Some would view it as synonymous with any kind of body awareness. That's a valid point of view. So for that, they're really just saying mindfulness of the body. The vast majority of mindfulness techniques out there are of the body. Not all, but many. So classic body scanning techniques, for example, the famous Vipassana Goenka style. Vipassana is a bit of a confusing word because it means insight. It has specific meanings within different schools of Buddhism. However, it's also a school of meditation. It's very popular where people sit for long periods of time. Quite intensive normally, it's just very Burmese, and focusing on the body, scanning the body up and down. This is certainly a practice I would give many beginning students as a way to begin to increase their overall body awareness and the factors we've discussed. I wouldn't necessarily recommend those Goenka retreats for beginners, however. I think they're a little severe, a little intense, and you can pop your mind and your knees doing them if you're not. I'd say it's at least an intermediate practice. Some people go on as their very first ever experience and have a great time, however, but I personally do not recommend those hardcore retreats. I'd say a 3 or 5 day retreat with a bit more walking meditation, a few more breaks, maybe even some talking is a good place for a beginner if you're wanting a retreat practice, which I do recommend as a period of intensity. For any sort of serious embodiment practitioner, I would say 1 or 2 retreats a year is a good place to start. I get it, we're all busy. There's things like home retreats and other alternatives to that, but it's certainly, I would say, ideal. And I'm not even talking about if you're like trying to get enlightened here, just if you're trying to build some body awareness. Or classic breath meditation, we could also say is a body meditation. Well, what are you aware of? Well, it's mostly the physical sensations of breathing. You may also be hearing, hearing the breath or using other senses around the breath, smelling the breath, whatever. But generally, it's body-based. Interestingly, I've found the typical breath meditation is like the tip of the nose. On the one hand, it's very good for embodied training because the breath is involved with any school of embodiment. It's involved with different emotions. Becoming more aware of the breath is extremely useful because the breath is an early warning system. You know, it's an indicator. It's it shows us when something's happening, and it often shows us earlier than larger parts of the body, and larger musculature, sorry. So, for example, if I want to know if I'm angry, the breath will probably change. My eyes are also pretty sensitive, maybe the genitals, lower abdominals, but the breath is a pretty, one of the first things that I notice changes. You know, and a yoga teacher might well say, you're pushing too hard in yoga when your breath shortens. Yeah, that's a good way to know if you're trying to overdoing it a bit, should we say, in yoga. Martial artists, obviously breath, whether it's ki or relaxation, there's lots of ways this is employed. In acting, breath is pretty critical. Singing, obviously, but almost every embodiment system is breath focused to a fairly large degree. There's very few systems that say, don't worry about it. I think in some schools of Tai Chi they do, but very rare. And so breath-based awareness can be extremely useful for that. And if we're feeling the breathing in the whole body, which actually in the Satipatthana Sutta, which is the kind of original Buddhist mindfulness text, actually that's what the whole of the mindfulness movement comes from, really. They talk about breathing in the whole body and noticing breath in the whole body. Certain schools will pick the lower abdomen, which is used these days. That's the one I recommend to embodiment people, people looking to build their embodiment. The reason for that is that it seems to be more core, and you can get actually a dissociation. So this is an interesting point. If we're just focusing on one part of the body, like the tip of the nose, we're not focusing on the rest of the body. We're deliberately not focusing on the rest of the body. That's the concentration exercise. So in concentration, there's a technique that's applied to a limited range of things in our awareness, whether it's a bell. This will be an example of a type of meditation which isn't so much to do with the body, and for that reason might be suitable for people that have a trauma background, for example, where the body isn't so safe or such a resource. Is developing some concentration and equanimity through sound meditation. There's also visualization meditations, very popular in Tibetan schools, imagining gods with thousands of arms doing very specific things, which can have all sorts of effects, whether you believe that it's a kind of tantric energy system type effect, or whether it's simply through having to concentrate. A couple of theories on that one. And then, of course, we can be mindful of our thoughts. So I remember originally for me, when I first started meditating, this wasn't possible. I didn't have enough abstraction, quality of mind, level of development. I wasn't able to do it. Meditate. The first monk I ever heard, this is many years ago, saying, notice your thoughts. I was like, what do you mean? I am my thoughts. And I didn't even notice I was thinking that, of course. I just was thinking that. I was confusing that thinking with oneself. There's this great Buddhist saying, don't believe everything you think. And that's very interesting to work with thinking. I think as an embodiment practitioner, I might have underdone that actually. So I'm returning to that somewhat in my meditation to notice the images I create, to notice the words that I'm speaking to myself. Talking of which, I'm aware that I often speak quite quickly, which some of the foreign listeners struggle with. I do endeavour to slow down, but it's a habit I have. I think very quickly, essentially. I speak half the speed, I think. So let's take a breath, take a pause. Maybe a good time now. Hopefully the editor didn't edit out that small pause. So we could say these aren't so body-based forms of meditation. Now, of course, your body's involved with thinking, that embodied cognition, embodies involved with everything. However, we're not focusing so much on the body like the classic body scanning. And as I said, the body breath meditation could be dissociative in that we're not really focusing on most of the body, right? 99% of the body we're not focusing on very deliberately. So I think in this way I've seen, people with traumatic relationships to the body who are kind of wanting to get out of the body actually get into certain kinds of meditation. Equally, there can be a kind of spiritual bypass that I've seen done by, we could say Zen or certain Tibetan schools, which are trying to be focus on awareness itself, which again is not exactly the body. This is where we get into very tricky territory linguistically, and maybe beyond my skill level actually to describe. And it seems to be very different in different schools. We're talking about presence or oneness. People start talking about different things. This formless awareness, which could include the body as well as anything else that's out there, or kind of non-picking, like labeling strategies where you're like, see, hear, feel. That's one of Shinzen's ones, or noticing, labeling sensations. So it might be, fiery, or it might be really focusing on the size and the quality of that sensation. And again, focusing in on things such as size, quality, shape, if it's changing, which it always is, beginnings, middles, and ends, you can get more attuned to subtler level of sensation in the body. Actually, there's a danger here when meditators become very aware of sensation, but without developing equanimity, either in their meditation or in something else like intense yoga or martial arts or cold showers, they can develop sensitivity ahead of their equanimity, which can be very problematic. People get very sensitive. In fact, they're not just sensitive, they're badly self-regulated, or there's a disbalance between sensitivity and self-regulation. And we'll see this in almost as a cultural movement now, actually, rather hilariously. But also, it is does cause real suffering when people are not able to regulate and they're feeling a lot. Okay, some schools of meditation differentiate between feeling the physical and feeling emotional layer. So this could be called the first and second foundation of mindfulness in classic Buddhism. So feeling tone of positive, negative, or neither positive nor negative, sometimes called neutral, is another skill one develops in the body, noticing pleasure, displeasure, and if you can bring equanimity to the pleasure, of course, you enjoy it more, it becomes less addictive as well. And if you bring equanimity to the displeasure, you don't what's called fire the second arrow. This means that your suffering is pain or displeasure plus reactivity or plus aversion, pushing away, denial. So being aware of the displeasure can be very useful, because by bringing just calm equanimity to it, you suffer less, and you run away less, and you are less of an asshole because you're acting in a way that's less scared and aggressive, aversive emotions. And equally for someone that's been through addiction issues, learning to identify pleasure, to enjoy the small pleasures in life, which tend to get a bit dumbed down, a bit numbed out when you've been having extreme pleasures, and that's a feature of modern life. You being able to appreciate subtler tastes, subtler sounds, subtler feelings. Very, very useful. And to not get clinging around those, which means you don't get graspy, you don't get addictive around them. So some people would include this as a layer of body, talk about pleasure. And some people will talk about these subtler sensations of body. Sometimes these are kind of characterized as a thing, like energy flowing through you. This word energy is quite interesting. Other people simply use this term energy as a way of talking about visualization. Other people talk about it as a way of paying attention. So I think I got this from Rob Babeo, who's an absolute genius teacher who's sadly very ill now. He's based in Gaia House. If you're American, this is like the Spirit Rock of England, Insight Meditation Center. And I think it was him that said this is you can think of one way of looking at energy in inverted commas as paying attention at the subtlest level to your body. I rather like that. Shinzen Young, I believe, talks about energy in this way as the physical manifestation and awareness of impermanence in the body. So different views on this. Some people will, however, actually imagine there are certain channels, nadis or acupuncture channels or whatever, and there's actually something physical that maybe one day scientists can measure flowing between them. Personally, I take a sort of agnostic view on this to some extent. I appreciate different people out there will have different points of view on this, and there's clearly a lot of things going on under the umbrella of energy, and I find people get quite triggered quite quickly if you try and take away their magic powers or perceived magic powers. So I've learned the hard way. This is a great way to lose friends at the embodiment party. So maybe I'll stay away from this from a bit more from now. Okay, so these techniques are paying attention to the bodies. Sometimes they're systematic, like body scanning. Sometimes you're just going with what's pleasurable. That can be nice if you're under-resourced. Sometimes you're just going whatever's jumping out at you. This is a technique I use a lot. When I'm distracted, I might also lie down, change the position of my meditation. Different ways to body scan, more systematic, less systematic. Often with students, I'm like, well, what's necessary? What's going to build the way of being? And they're a very systematic person anyway. Maybe they could build their, we might say, earthiness through the method. This is really key, actually, before I talk about posture. The manner of the meditation is a huge part of what the meditation is and its outcome. Yeah, so let me give you an example. So if I'm systematically scanning for exactly 10 minutes at the same time every day, that's a certain way. I'm unlikely to build a body of spontaneity. Equally, if I wanted to be more spontaneous in my practice, how I do the meditation is important. Maybe I'm doing a metta, loving kindness meditation. Equally, this can be embodied, developing the Shinzen Young calls it nurture positive. So developing the physical sensations of, say, love or kindness or compassion in the body, because they're physical actions, as Paul Linden points out. Listen out for the podcast with Paul Linden and Shinzen Young together coming up. That's a fantastic fucking podcast, by the way. One of my favorite ever ones, bringing those two geniuses together. So Paul will talk about emotions, actions done in the body. So by this way, we can subtly alter our bodies while meditating, as well as using maybe phrases or imagery, less embodied means. And this would be, the Brahma Viharas, they're called in classical Buddhism. You'll find them in Tibetan Buddhism as well. Nurture positive, Shinzen calls them. These meditations where we're increasing the certain emotional states or certain pro-social states through replicating them in our body, or just simply allowing the body to relax sometimes is all it takes. So anyway, if we were doing a metta meditation, like a loving kindness meditation, METTA, kindness meditation, universal friendliness is probably the best translation of the Pali. Actually, often the Pali translations you'll get are kind of from the 60s and they're a bit hippie, like loving kindness. It's not actually that good a translation. Universal friendliness meditation. If we did that in an unfriendly or an unkind way, self-abusive, I'm going to be the best at this, I'm so shit, I can't believe how rubbish I am at this. Well, that is undermining the meditation itself, right? So this is something that took me a remarkably long time to figure out, and I'd say is very important with meditation. Of course, posture. Oh my God, there's a whole subject. Lots I could say about this. Generally, it's like, does the posture support the practice? So in this sense, all meditation is embodied because it involves posture. And there's certain schools like Zen, certain schools of Zen. If you listen to Doshin, who was on, for example, will say, or Keith Martin Smith, that Zen is extremely embodied because it's all about the posture and maintaining that still upright alertness is so key to Zen. It's certainly the case that, because your meditation is embodied as much as anything, that changing the subtle movements of the spine or putting the hands up like in yoga or down like in Tibetan Buddhism can make quite big differences, as can whether you lie down, stand up, sit down or walk. These are the 4 classical positions of meditation in classical Buddhism. These really makes quite a big difference which of these you're doing, and you might want to pick that skillfully. Obviously on an audio like this, I'm not going to get into the subtler aspects of posture now, other than to say I think it is remarkably underlooked at as an aspect of meditation. Okay, so what we talked about, types of embodied meditation, nurture positive, body scanning, breath-based meditation, walking meditation I've mentioned briefly, focusing, there's different kinds of that, focusing on sensations of walking, for example. So what we could all say, this is all just mindfulness, right? Here's the key distinction. So if you stayed with me this long, well done. Key distinction here. So, and this took me a while, we can meditate on the body or as a body. Yeah, it's a little hard to describe, but it may make sense. So if the body is an object kind of over there, and it's mindfulness, again, the dodgy translation of the Pali, which could be translated as remembrance or any other, heartfulness or any other term. Well, not any other term, but a number of other translations are possible. In English, they went with mindfulness, which sounds very cognitive. And mindfulness could be, I think, misunderstood as a sort of cold observing. Yeah, in meditation, you can either distance yourself from phenomena or come closer to it. Again, these are metaphors which really only come to make sense with practice. Some coffee. So this idea of coming close, we could say, is a more embodied approach to meditation. So body as self, not body as object, not body over there, but meditating as body rather than on body. Again, this is remarkably difficult to teach in clear operational language, I find, but at a certain point in meditating it just makes sense, and there's a way you inverted commas drop into the body. There's a sort of coming home. I often just do these days my practice is often a full body, so not focusing on a particular object, but just the whole body based meditation, where I'm just kind of sitting in, enjoying, luxuriating in like a bath my body. So for me, that's it's incredibly simple in some ways, but I don't think I was able to do that some years ago, either to have the capacity to be with the whole body. And in the meantime, it can just look like rapid scanning, or that ability to be in the body in that way. Very tired now. It's been a long day. Yeah, that's, I think, the key distinction between an embodied approach to meditation and simply a mindful one. So body as part of self, and in body or as body rather than on or at body. I hope that is somewhat clear. Okay, what else to say? Talked about different schools of meditation. They can have a more or less embodied approach, as it were. Theravada Buddhism certainly stresses a lot of body-based practice. The Tibetans have an earthy kind of feel to them. even though the practice itself may involve a lot of visualizations. Zen, I've definitely seen to be a bit abstract and disembodied in some cases and very embodied in others. And I think some of the New Age meditations, most of you probably know I'm not a huge fan of New Age stuff, will probably be aware that a lot of that stuff could be trying to transcend the body, get out of the body, relate to some kind of spiritual body. Is often a spiritual bypassing, as John Welwood would call it, involved, where one wants to get out of the dirt or the messiness or the emotionality of the body and somehow transcend that. So for me, when I've talked to people who really understand the idea of enlightenment and maybe are more developed in their practice than me, an embodied enlightenment, including and transcending the body is the thing they seem to be pointing to. Certainly the teachers I respect, who seem to have solid lineage, rather than getting out of the body, avoiding the body, transcending the body, and saying, it's the phrase "I'm not my body," for example, is. Could be coming from one of two places. Could be coming from someone that's really, truly started to identify with awareness itself. This is one definition of enlightenment. Really identifying with awareness itself, but includes the body within that. And another person might be saying, I'm not my body, just denying it like that's crap, it's a piece of shit, and running away from the body, not including that aspect of themselves, that kosher in the yoga terminology, that aspect of their being, we could say. So when someone says, I'm not my body, I'd say tune into what might be, where they might be coming from with that. Okay, so I'm not today going to lead embodied meditations. This is more about embodied meditations. But if you go to YouTube, there's a couple of embodied meditations there that you can access for me if you'd like. So this has been a pretty brief overview of what's a pretty big topic. Some of the concepts can take a little while to get. I've tried to put this at a sort of intermediate level. If you're a complete beginner, you might just want to start with like basic introductions to mindfulness, that kind of thing. If you're more advanced, if you're interested, almost like a tantric approach, then Reggie Ray writes some good books, and he's got some good stuff out there on the body and meditation. There's people in the Triratna school in the UK who really focus on the body as well. I was trying to think what other good teachers are out there. Let me look at my bookshelf for a minute. I mentioned the Satipatthana Sutra, which is a classic mindfulness text. Yeah, I think they're the main people I'd recommend. Normally I'm recommending to students either Shinzen Young or Reggie Ray, because they're sort of on a spectrum. The Shinzen's the most clear, Reggie Ray's sort of deep, and well, Shinzen's deep too, but Reggie Ray's can be a bit esoteric, mystical even, and in a beautiful way. Actually, I like his work very much. It does come from a slightly more sort of guru-based kind of tradition, Tibetan Buddhism. There's certain precautions with that, I would say. But Reggie Ray and Shinzen Young, definitely both very good places to start. If people have other ones they want to mention, maybe they could put them in the Facebook group, for example. If you've not discovered the Facebook group, I would recommend that. If it's quite active. I think I saw a post that had about 40 likes on yesterday, and relatively active. And if people ask me questions on there, recommend speakers, I really do use it. So people could recommend other resources on the body in meditation. Okay, so I think that's enough for today. Bit of a download there. I hope there was something of use to you in all that. Some ways to get more, to give back, and to get more involved now. So the biggest request I have would be to share the podcast with your friends, people that you think would really enjoy it. Email it to them, put it on your social media, tell them about it, old school. Really appreciate that. Equally, if you want to support us financially, you can go to Patreon. That's patreon.com/embodiment podcast and give us $1 an episode. And I'd say they're well worth $1. So that's less than £1 if you're in UK-ish. So please go there. On the embodiedfacilitator.com website is where this is hosted. If most people I think listen to for iTunes. iTunes, we'd certainly appreciate a review. The way iTunes works means that a review means more people will find it. iTunes regards it as more important for searches. So even a couple of sentences review really does help as a little thank you to us. And if you want to go to embodiedfacilitator.com, you can see the actual links to the sites. There's there's comments on there. The Facebook group tends to be where people discuss things. So if you go to put in the Embodiment podcast into Facebook, there's a page which is relatively quiet and a group which does have some discussion on. So I will reply to things personally there. So also on embodiedfacilitator.com website, there's all sorts of freebies there. There's videos, there's free ebooks, there's ebooks you can buy. And of course, there's our newsletter list. If you want to stay in touch and learn about things like the Embodied Facilitator course and our next Embodied Yoga Principles teacher training, then go to that website and you'll see a little pop-up and you can get the newsletter through there. Okay, so I think they're the main ones. Tell your friends, pay us some money on Patreon, give us a review on iTunes, send us your email if you want to be on the newsletter list, and get involved on the Facebook there. Bit long. Pick whatever you like that works for you.
Till next time, welcome home to the body.